Digital Marketing Radio, episode 129, Antifragile Marketing, how to grow your business in uncertainty.
DigitalMarketingRadio.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by Aweber. Build your email list, engage your subscribers, do email the right way. I've arranged a special deal for all Digital Marketing Radio listeners, and that's a 60-day free trial with the email marketing software provider I use, Aweber. Lock in your 60-day free trial, plus view a video that I've recorded on the 3 reasons why I use their service at aweber.com/DMR. Just go to aweber.com/DMR to get started today.
The big interview with David Bain.
I'm David Bain, and this is Digital Marketing Radio, weekly interviews with online marketing gurus. Catch up with all the previous episodes at digitalmarketingradio.com. I'm joined today by a man who markets a marketing agency. He's the Senior Director of Online Marketing for Stone Temple Consulting, a digital marketing agency serving major brands. Welcome to DMR, Mark Traphagen.
David, thank you so much. So good to be with you, and thank you for pointing out that I have the most meta job in the marketing industry.
I loved it. Yeah, meta's good. We started off with meta keywords, moved on to meta description, and now we're just on meta. So, yeah. Well, you can find Mark, as I mentioned, over at stonetemple.com. But Mark, what exactly is anti-fragile marketing?
Well, it's a concept that I've been thinking a lot about recently, and going to be producing a lot of content myself on coming up. It's not original to me, but it comes out of a book that I read recently that kind of rocked my world in a number of ways. It's a book that's been out since 2012. I believe in 2012 it was a New York Times bestseller, titled Antifragile, by an author named Nicholas Nahib Taleb. Taleb. I don't know how to pronounce that exactly. I haven't heard it said, but Taleb is famous for a couple of other books. One of probably the most famous that people might know him from is a book called The Black Swan. And The Black Swan is his concept of basically that thing which we never expect to happen will probably happen eventually. The certainty of uncertainty, the inevitability of chaos in anything, no matter how well laid our plans might be. And so the book Antifragile takes that to the next level, or to a broader level, and maybe to a more positive take on that, to say, if the worst thing that could possibly happen, inevitably, sooner or later, given enough time, will happen, how do we build our lives? How do we build economic structures? How do we build families? How do we build societies? And you can apply it everywhere. I'm applying it to marketing. How do we build marketing plans for our businesses that are anti-fragile? And in a moment, I can describe what's meant by that concept of anti-fragile.
Sure, yeah. What you're saying there just reminded me of an old book called Of Mice and Men, John Steinbeck. And the quote, the title of Mice and Men actually comes from Robert Burns' poem, Scotland's Bard, Scotland's version of Shakespeare, the best laid schemes o' mice and men gang after gley, and it goes on about that. But the quote's about how things often go wrong, and maybe how you can prepare for things going wrong as well. So maybe not a completely original concept, but you can take concepts that aren't completely new, but put a little spin on them, and just get people thinking about something a little bit different than modern digital marketing, or something that a lot of people, I guess, try and make plans too easily and assume that things are going to go easily or go well, and don't take the downside into consideration. So,
and we assume on top of that we have command of the data, that the data we're looking at is the right data, that it's the necessary data, that we're not missing anything in the picture, and that we can analyze it correctly. We make a lot of those assumptions, and we leap to conclusions based on them that aren't always justified. But a great tangible example that maybe will help your listeners to get this concept of antifragile that Taleb gives in the book is the Fukushima nuclear power plant in Japan. Most of your listeners will probably remember that name from the tremendous disaster, the earthquake and resulting tidal wave that hit Japan a couple of years ago and caused the destruction and meltdown of the Fukushima nuclear power plant, rendering a large area around it virtually uninhabitable for perhaps for many decades or even hundreds of years to come. The interesting thing that Taleb points out is that the Fukushima power plant was state of the art, and meaning that in the nuclear industry, it was built to withstand the worst earthquake that Japan had ever experienced. And as he points out, the problem with that kind of thinking is that the worst thing that's ever happened, and you take this in any situation, is not necessarily the worst thing that could happen. And so the worst earthquake that ever hit Japan and resulting tidal wave was not any one that was known in history, but it was the one that destroyed the Fukushima nuclear power plant. So in an anti-fragile concept, you are building things, first of all, not for that which has happened in the past, but that which might happen. And obviously there's with realm probabilities apply here. I mean, it's not an anything is possible world. I don't build my house based on the fact that an asteroid could fall on it. But looking at probabilities, I say, I need to build things that will withstand. And then quickly, just let me give the concept of anti-fragility and why Taleb uses that word. He looks at the word fragile. And we understand what a fragile thing is. A fragile thing is something that will break under a certain amount of stress. And usually we term something fragile that, doesn't take a whole lot of stress and that thing is going to crack. It's going to break. It's going to fall down.
Sure.
He asks the question, what is the opposite of fragile? And most of us would respond, strong, robust, words like that, right? And he says, but those aren't exactly the opposite of fragile. He places them at one corner of a triangle. So you have fragile, then you have robust. Things that are robust will stand up to a lot of stress, but they will remain the same. They may survive, up to a certain level of stress, much more than something that's fragile. They'll still be there, but all they've done is survive. They haven't changed. An anti-fragile thing or system is something that when stress comes and you apply more and more stress, always up to a certain point, not only does it survive, but that thing actually grows. It becomes better. It improves as a result of the stress. So I hope that's helpful toward the basic concept of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, essentially what you're saying is that strong may be strong in certain areas, but anti-fragile protects you against unexpected things. So it strengthens all areas. So just strong may be focusing on the wrong areas possibly.
Right. It's basically, instead of, trying to just build a bigger wall against the chaos, against the disorder, against the inevitable bad things that will happen, downturns and things like that. It's instead building a kind of resiliency that is going to be able to evolve and thrive in the midst of that. If you understand, without getting too scientific or technical here, if you understand evolution, how the theory of evolution works, evolution at a very simple level works on the basis of stressors. There are things in the environment that challenge living things, and those challenges mean that some things will survive and some things will not. But with evolution, what can happen, it doesn't always happen, but what can happen is that something that develops a mutation that allows it to survive more favorably and passes it on has actually grown. It's changed because of the stress in the environment, and it passes on that characteristic so that its future generations are more likely to survive and pass on. So it's talking about really setting up, and we're focusing back on marketing here. It's setting up kind of marketing that is built to evolve. That's built to this is a bad way of saying it, maybe, but roll with the punches in a way that we actually grow and get better at our marketing, even as marketing volatility happens.
So are these concepts that everyone in a marketing department need to embrace, or is it only for the leaders within an organization to really understand and implement within their businesses?
Well, it may be that the leaders need to have a deeper understanding of it, but I think a successful anti-fragile business or anti-fragile marketing agency is going to have an anti-fragile culture. you're going to instill habits. You're going to instill ways of looking at the world that will tend to help build those structures. So, I see as part of a culture. That's part of what I'm trying to develop for our own agency, for Stone Temple, for the businesses that we work with. I'm now, doing some deep thinking and research and thinking about how can we build businesses, build cultures, and build marketing plans that embrace anti-fragility and that will thrive. Because the one thing that we know, anybody here that's a marketer, is responsible for marketing or responsible for growing a business, the one thing we know is that just when you think you've got it figured out, just when you know just how Google works, or your advertising market, or you've got a good plan that seems to be bringing in traffic, something changes, something goes down, something happens. That can be a competitor rising up, it can be Google changing their algorithm, it can be all sorts of factors out there that you can't plan for the factors themselves, and you cannot predict them. But you can build structures that will be able to respond to them in ways that will continue to cause your business to grow and adapt, and not only survive but be better in the long run.
So, I mean, you're talking about responding to uncertainty. Is the structure or the very nature of having a small business better equipped with dealing with these sort of issues and actually implementing them and more successfully adapting more quickly than larger businesses out there? Or is that not necessarily the case?
Well, it can be. And this is one area, the concept of anti-fragility says that there is no necessary advantage to being bigger. There's no necessary advantage to even being smarter, as most people term that. Now, Taleb, anybody that's read the book knows that Taleb tends to be very skeptical toward academics. And that would, in our world, that would be, the experts, those that have all the credentials. He perhaps is a little bit too skeptical toward them and a little bit too cynical at times even. But his point is that, well, he brings up this thing. Let me bring in this concept of what's called the green lumber fallacy. And the green lumber fallacy is based on a story of supposedly this trader in the futures market started investing and trading in what he heard when he heard about green lumber, and he thought that green lumber was actually lumber that was painted green. Now, anybody in the lumber business and a lot of the rest of us realize that when you talk about green lumber, what you're talking about simply is lumber that has not been dried. It's not been allowed to age and dry. It's fresh cut, so it has certain characteristics to it. And the point of the story is that he was very successful, even though he came up with these very advanced theories about why green colored lumber would do better in the marketplace. And of course, his theories were completely fallacious. They had not, because he was not actually trading. Being a trader, he'd never even saw it. A futures trader, they don't deal with the actual commodity. They're just trading shares in it. So he'd never seen the actual lumber, never actually visited a lumber mill. He had no idea what he was talking about. But his practices as a doer were successful, were accurate, and were helpful. So even though he had the wrong academic ideas, as it were, he was able to be anti-fragile. He was able to be resilient and grow in the marketplace. The point of that story is not to totally reject academia or theories or developing philosophies about things. It's to be a little more skeptical about them and to put a little more value, and this I think one of Taleb's main point, in the doers, the practitioners, those that are down in the ditches actually doing it and seeing what's happening and testing things and trying things out and seeing what works, will have a lot better chance, he believes, of success in the long run than those who sit in an ivory tower and just make complex theories about what should affect the marketplace.
Right. Okay. Wow. There's a lot to think about with this concept here, but I'd like to go deeper as well, and certainly read the book now as well myself. But it's all very well to make a business more able to adapt in disorder. But Evan Doobie is actually asking a good question in the chat, and he's saying, can a marketing program actually gain from disorder? What do you think of that one, Mark?
Well, I think it can, and we need to be careful in defining that, because when you say that that sounds counterintuitive to most people, a marketing program or a program for anything gaining from disorder, because we tend to think, especially in the West, we tend to think in terms of things are going to be better if we can just establish an order. We get procedures, we get plans, but I want anybody here who might be listening to this, if you've ever been involved in building an advanced marketing plan, whether that's a 1-year plan, a 2-year plan, or God forbid, a 5-year plan, the one thing, if you've ever lived through the experience of that, the one thing you can be sure of is that when you get to wherever that is, the end of the 1 year, the 2 years, the 5 years, your plan will probably look nothing like when you started out. And that's not a rejection of planning. It's not saying you shouldn't try to plan, but it's saying hold your plans very loosely. I always like to quote from the one of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, where one of the pirates is asked about the pirate code, and somebody's disturbed because they seem to be doing something that violates the sacred pirate code, and the one pirate says, "Oh, the code a little more actually like guidelines." And I think we need to take our plans in that way. We hold them loosely, but it's the concept of building an organization and building marketing plans that anticipate that things will change and that things will go wrong, and that watch for that, and that are ahead of responding to that, and not being so rigidly married to the theory that you have or the plan that you have that you say, no, we got to forge ahead. This is the plan, or this is the theory that we have. We're going to go ahead with that no matter what. But being flexible to look and say, well, you know what? That's not working right now. Why is that? What should we try other than that? It's being responsive. Another way of saying it is the concept you often hear of failing fast. The idea of failing fast is to put the practitioner, the doer, rather than the theoretician, is willing to get out there in the marketplace and just try things and throw them up against the wall. And if it fails, it fails, and you don't moan and groan about it, and you don't have 75 meetings about it. You just say, okay, what did we learn from that? And what can we apply to that to the next thing that we try?
So what if you start in a business as a marketing director and you're perhaps in charge of a department that is in a business that has been quite traditional in thinking and does its own thing and has done its own thing quite well for quite a few years? How do you encourage more open thinking, more able to embrace these kind of concepts that you're talking about?
Well, that's going to vary within the organization and what you think you can get away with. But I'm a little bit. I have a little bit of a soft place in my heart for the disruptor, as much as that's an overused term. But the disruptor within an organization, and I think you have to be smart about how you do that. But I think my own story is one of that. Is in an agency before this one, the one that I was in, that was good, was doing good things and having a certain amount of success. But I saw areas in which I thought we're leaving things on the table, or we're not trying some things out that we should be trying. And I'd bring those up in meetings and people would nod their head and then go on to the next agenda item. So at some point I just decided to start doing some of those things. The old saying of it's better to ask forgiveness than permission. And again, you have to be wise in doing that. Some people can do that and find themselves right out on the street very quickly. But I did it in small but increasing ways, to the point where someday, at some point, something that I was doing was just a reality. It was just working, and there was no big deal about it. There was nobody that came and said like, "Oh my gosh, you were right, Mark. We should have listened to you back then." It's kind of like, oh, we do this now, and look, this is happening. Great, keep doing that. That's fine. Keep building that. And I created things, for myself as well as for the organization that benefited me later on. That increased the organization's reputation, my reputation, led to some of the things that I'm doing today. So I think it's that, that spirit of just being willing to pioneer some things, but doing it wisely, doing it, you're not doing it to be in your face of anybody. You don't trumpet it, but you build something and say like, hey, look, I experimented with this, and by golly, it's doing something. It's working over here. What do you want to do with that? Wow.
I'm sure I could continue talking to you about this concept for at least another hour or so, but if you'd like to hear more of Mark's opinions, of course, you can listen to the first edition of businessbookofthemonth.com, because you were a special guest on that podcast episode number 1 as well. But I'm very tempted to suggest this book as the next business book of the month here, but that's going on to a different topic there. So tell you what, let's segue into the second section of our discussion. So that focuses more on your thoughts on where digital marketing has been and where it's heading. So starting off with
software I couldn't live without.
What software do you currently use in your business that if someone took away from you, it would significantly impact your marketing success?
Oh, well, I'm not a big software guy, but there are some things, some tools that I've become very enamored with, and one of those that I mention constantly these days that I'm just fascinated with is BuzzSumo, and a lot of people have mentioned that. If anybody's not familiar, BuzzSumo is a tool that allows you to see the social shares around any piece of content, and keeping in mind that social shares are not the whole ball of wax by any means for determining the value of a piece of content. They do indicate something, and so that in combination. But I'm using now based on, and I'll qualify that with BuzzSumo itself. Just recently released a study a few weeks ago that they did in conjunction with Moz. It was released on the Moz blog that I highly recommend. It was very fascinating, and it was about basically they discovered that contrary to, again, this is kind of an anti-fragile concept, because it's where theory doesn't prove out to be the actual fact. Most people have an assumption that things that get highly shared on social media also produce links. In other words, they get links from other sites. It seems to be like that would go together. What they actually showed is for the vast majority of content, that's not true. First of all, most content by far gets neither high shares nor links. But of the content that does get any of those, the vast majority of that by far gets one or the other. Gets a lot of social shares, or gets a good amount of links, which add to search engine value, SEO value. But very little content gets both. And the content that gets both tends to be, guess what many of us have talked about is the content that is the highest value content. Tends to be generally longer form, more insightful, better researched, more opinionated, expressing things that are not just the common knowledge or common thoughts about things. That kind of content can hit that sweet spot of getting both. So all that to say, with the tool regard, is that I'm doing that. It's causing me to do a lot more work to look at our own content and that of our clients and say, what is hitting that sweet spot? What is BuzzSumo's telling me is getting high amount of shares, but it's also other tools I have tell me that it's getting good links from other places, and seeing what can we do more of that, because I think that is the sweet spot for content.
But also, I gleaned from what you said there is, perhaps I'm reading between the lines here, but what I reckon you also said was always keep a little bit of your gut instinct as well when deciding whether or not a piece of content is the right piece to be writing, or deciding on how to market something. And you can never completely rely on just a tool just to give you all the indicators. Is that a good thing that you would agree with?
Yeah, I think that's very good, and we do that all the time. There's certain things that we produce as far as content pieces that are not just by a formula, and I think you can do bad work by getting stuck into a formula of saying this worked, so we keep doing just more of that. There are things that we produce just because our gut tells us that this is good for us. It's good for our reputation. It's good for what we want to be known for, especially if it's something that's on our own website. Sometimes we don't even care so much if it doesn't get a lot of traffic at first, or social shares or links. It's on our site. And we know that one of the functions of the content on our site, for example, is that when people, because our particular business, we have a long sales cycle, people spend a long time researching and thinking before they buy our services. One of the things that they will typically do is at some point in that process, they'll visit our site and start poking around, saying, what are these guys about? What do they know? And some of those pieces are on there because they help at that point. They're not the big things that are out that everybody talks about, but they say like, oh, look at this. They have a lot of keen insights that I haven't seen anywhere else. It's supportive in that way.
Okay, well, I'm going to stick with software for just one more question and ask an even slightly more challenging question, which is, what piece of software don't you use, but you've heard good things about and you intend to
Mm.
try at some point in the near future?
I want to get more into some of the competitive analysis software. I'm thinking things like SEM Rush, and this is competitive analysis for online marketing,
Sure.
obviously, but SEM Rush, Similar Web. These are products. Similar Web in particular. I know at Stone Temple, a lot of our consultants are using it very actively already. And I sat through a basic class in it. I want to start applying it and using it more because these are tools that give you some very keen insights into what's working for your competition, in particular, what's working for other sites that you are competing with. So I want to have a better understanding of that.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I'll include links to all the software tools that you recommended there on the show notes at digitalmarketingradio.com. But let's move on to.
I wish I would have.
So I'd like you to look back in the very first day that you're involved in trying to market a business online. What didn't you do so well? What do you wish that you would have done differently?
Oh, wow. You come up with the best questions. Um, I wish I would have. I'm going to go back to reinforce something that I said earlier in the show.
Sure.
And I wish I would have been bolder to trust my instincts and experiment with things from the beginning. In the beginning, I think I was too enamored with the experts. With I think there's value there. I don't want to. I needed to learn, and I tried to seek out and learn from the best. But there was too much fear of if I don't do something exactly like the top names say, this is the way you do it.
Yeah.
That I will do it wrong. And so, yeah, that I would have been. I would go back and tell my younger self, don't be afraid to experiment. Don't be afraid to trust your instincts. Don't be afraid to try something out.
So do you think initially that you treated the online world too differently compared with the offline world? And in reality, you should have actually used more concepts from offline and just combine that with your instinct, as you said.
That is golden. Yes, because it's something I talk about a lot. The more I'm in this game, the more I discover, the more I realize that at the heart and the core of it, everything that we do in online marketing, digital marketing, whatever you want to call it, ultimately the things that really work have an analogy in the real world, in the offline world. Things like building relationships, the value of relationships. Anybody who runs a corner store in a small town knows about that. You've got to show up. You've got to be involved in the community. You've got to get connected with people that other people care about. You've got to not be talking about yourself all the time, but helping people. All these things that anybody running a successful small corner business in a small town knows to do, really have their analogies. Now we do them at maybe a bigger scale and a faster pace online, but it's really the same stuff.
Mm. But sometimes if we try and increase the pace too much online, then we make things a little bit too artificial again, and maybe we end up shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit.
Yeah, it's always possible. And you've got to be reflective. And I think that's another thing that I would say to anybody who is trying to grow in this marketing game. It's a lot of the things. There's so many analogies, just life in general, that really work. And I think one of those things is taking time to reflect. And I'm trying to do that more, especially in the position that I'm in today. I'm actually scheduling in time when I'm not doing work, but I'm just thinking. And I'm not even during that time. That's apart from my time of researching or reading, studying things like that. This is just, maybe going over some notes that I have, some things I've been thinking about, like this anti-fragile concept that we started with, and going for a walk and thinking like, what does that mean? Where would that apply? What should I be thinking about? And I'll find often that, that's when the insights come that are unlooked for, that you can't get out of the marketing plan, but they come, they're like inspiration to an author, to a writer. And those can often be some of the best ideas. So, just there's a very human side of this, and you have to trust as you grow, as you gain confidence, you trust your instincts and allow time to think.
The this or that round.
So this is the quick response round. 10 quick questions, just 2 rows here. Try not to think about the answer too much, and you're only allowed to use the word both on one occasion. Ready to go?
All right.
Email or Twitter?
Twitter.
Audio or video?
Video.
Affiliate or display advertising?
Affiliates, but not real strong on that one.
Facebook or Google Plus?
Facebook these days.
Online press releases or one-on-one relations?
One-on-one.
Paid search or SEO?
SEO still, but
Email contact form or telephone number?
email contact form.
Website or app?
Say it again, I'm sorry.
Website or app?
Still website.
Social subscriber or email subscriber?
Email subscriber.
And local marketing or global marketing?
Well, for us, global. Boy, that was painful. Painful.
It was for a couple. It was for paid search or SEO and website or app, wasn't it?
Yeah, because they're some of those are in transition. They're in flux. There's huge overlap, and it's hard. I resisted using the both.
You did,
but,
not even in the last one. So, tell me a little bit more about paid search or SEO, because you said still SEO, but you're on the cusp of going paid marketing is more effective.
Well, one of the things that we're paying a lot of attention to is what seems to us now to be the fact. And this is, again, an attempt at being anti-fragile, an attempt at looking and saying, what might change in the future that we take for granted today. And the thing that in my business, that we tend to take for granted today is Google. Google is so huge. It brings so much traffic, or even organic search still is very effective, but it would be the height of fragility to assume that that's always going to be around, that it's always going to be that way. And the fact of the matter is that it's not just apps. People are talking a lot about apps now, but it's the Internet of Things. My boss Eric Enga did a great presentation on this at PubCon last week. When we talk about the Internet of Things, that all these devices that are connected to that, we don't have a keyboard. Whether it's our watches, it'll be our refrigerators, our thermostats, our cars, things that we talk to, that we're going to need instant responses, instant answers that aren't going to involve Google, that aren't going to involve what we think of traditionally as search. Now, I think search is going to be around for a long time to come, but it's going to be at some point, it's going to start to be a decreasing part of what we do. So things like paid search, paid social, are things that we are beginning to explore more for ourselves, because we're anticipating that future when it already is. Look at Facebook. When we talk about it, it's necessary to pay to play there if you want to get anywhere, right?
Yeah. Okay, well, that means that I'm looking forward to the answer to the next question, which is
the $10,000 question.
If I was to give you $10,000 and you had to spend it over the next few days on a single thing to grow your business, what would you measure? What would you spend it on, and how would you measure success?
I would spend that. I have an immediate answer to that. I would invest that as much as I could in finding and attracting new, brilliant people to our organization. There is no tool, no gimmick, no other thing which is more valuable, I think, to any business than having innovative, creative people involved. So if there's any way that I can invest that $10,000 in bringing me more of those kind of people, that's where I would spend it.
And are you talking about direct employees to work with you face to face, or perhaps outsourcers, or does it not really matter?
Well, that would be the best. I mean, you're only going to get so far with $10,000 for getting permanent employees. Yeah. It's certainly not going to do the payroll for them. Maybe you can invest it in toward researching and recruiting those kinds of people. But maybe yes, maybe more tangibly, if I actually had to spend $10,000, it would probably be in things that would build partnerships out there. Because right now, to our business, some of the most valuable things that we have are partnerships with parallel but non-competitive businesses, other people who are in our industry but not direct competitors, with whom we've built a relationship. We can exchange information and data. We can run projects together. We can do marketing campaigns together. That's brought us tremendous value. So that's the direction I would invest.
And do these partnerships end up building from relationships that have actually benefited you before any formal agreement has been in place, or have you actually had to arrange some kind of formal agreement before you really benefited from that?
Oh, most of them without exception benefited us from before there's any formal agreement. And many, in fact, there is no formal agreement. They really are on the level of relationships or friendships. Now, a few have evolved into real partnerships, actual on paper contractual agreements or other types of formal agreements to do things together. So that, that has evolved out of some of those, but I don't expect that all of those will ever become that. So yes, it's quite possible for a relationship to be very valuable and very mutually beneficial without there necessarily being a formal partnership.
Wow. Okay. Well, I reckon it's time to distill all your great advice into one final takeaway.
My number one takeaway.
So you've offered a lot of great advice in our conversation, so thanks so much for that. But what's the number one takeaway? What's the single most important step that our listeners need to take away and implement within their businesses?
Trust your experience, trust your instincts, and do it. Become a practitioner above a theoretician. Don't ignore theory, but most valuable is just go out and do it day after day and be learning from what you do. Fail fast.
Wow.
I thought that was one. Did I get that all as one thing?
No, that's good. I'm sure I can get a tweet out of that. So that's always great. It's funny. I was talking to Anne Smarty last night. I'm sure you know
Oh yeah,
Anne.
know Anne well. Yeah.
So Anne was on episode 128. It's not published yet, but it was on by the time we have this episode out. And Anne's takeaway was just do it as well. So very action orientated, and she was saying,
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, don't worry about the fact that it's not perfect. Just get out there and start implementing, and you can perfect things as you go along.
Yeah, most of the great people that I know in this industry, I think of as first and foremost doers. Now, many of them are great thinkers and theoreticians and can write at depth at their ideas or philosophies behind things, but they're first and foremost doers. They're out there rather than talking about something. They're trying it. They're experimenting. They're working at what they're doing and learning from that.
Superb. Well, thank you, friend, for joining us. If you like what you heard, send me a tweet. Leave me a review. Wherever you're listening to this, it would be great to hear from you. Just say hello somewhere. But finally, I'm also hosting another live show every Friday called This Week in Organic. So head over to thisweekinorganic.com to find out more about that. It actually redirects to another blab if you're watching this live on Blab. But anyway, I reckon that's all for now. So thanks so much for joining us if you're here live. Thanks so much for listening to it if you're listening to the replay. Adios, and thank you so much, Mark, for joining me. You're really great.
Thank you, David.